Hello, this is Dr. Randy Bach. Today's August 11, 2021, and I'm here for, you got it, another coronavirus conversation. Maybe it's just a coronavirus monologue. I'm going to be riffing for a little bit, but I would be happy to take comments, questions, criticisms. I hate criticisms, so maybe just compliments. That's all C. Coronavirus conversation, criticisms, comments, conversation. Anyway, please, feel free to um, let me know what you're thinking about this episode in particular, or what you'd like to hear perhaps next week. We've been doing this weekly, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. thereabouts. I got started a few minutes late today. I got into kind of a mental, I wouldn't call it a tailspin, but and nor is it like a short circuit. There's just a lot of interesting things out there, and I try to fit them all underneath my hair and somewhere in my brain pan, and try to make sense of what's been going on. It's a difficult proposition because I guess for I don't know, not all intents, for my intents and purposes, this thing's done. It's over. Technical knockout or knockout. Coronavirus has lost. Humanity has won. We can go about our business and frankly have big birthday bashes if we want. If we happen to be turning 60 years old, we happen to be an ex-president, we happen to have a really cool spot on Martha's Vineyard and apparently infinite money, I guess registered recently as a billionaire, and you happen to be that guy, his initials are BHO, and you invite 600 people, 500 people, and they're all going to be milling around together, close quarters, despite CDC recommendations and various states announcing that we have to be wearing masks indoors and masks potentially outdoors, and keep our kids masked up in school. And if you're a teacher, do the same. Yet, if you have kind of the political sinecure, you're in the right spot. I mean, why not? I'm all in favor of the parties. Just I was in favor of opening things up when, again, you can kind of quote me on this, when the New York Knicks absurdly and unexpectedly made the NBA playoffs last spring. That was a big deal. New York was one of the most closed places societally for the masks and social distancing, all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, the fans were like, "Hey, it's been a decade since we've been in the playoffs. We want to be there. We want to watch our team." And guess what? The mayor, the governor relented. I guess it was maybe it was more gubernatorial. The erstwhile Governor Cuomo. I guess now he's been taken over by Governor, I can't pronounce it, Hochul, the first female governor. I guess she won't have the Me Too problems that he apparently had. I have to say, I don't want to go too much on a diversion into Mario Cuomo issues, but it'd be interesting, no pun intended, to follow Noah's Ark. That is Trevor Noah's Ark of emotions when he announced himself last year as a Cuomo-sexual, which is a pun actually I thought of myself independently. Probably a lot of other people did, and a lot of people were hot and bothered about this and swoony over Mario Cuomo. And I kind of, I said they were all kind of remoras, if you know that fish that kind of cleans the whale's surfaces, on the way up, and now they're piranhas on the way down. So if your star is ascending, everything's kind of cool. On the descent, not so much. Anyway, I kind of feel that Mario Cuomo should have stuck around, should have taken his hits and gone for the impeachment route, and see where the chips fall. I don't really like kind of death by innuendo. People have things to say. They should say it at the time. I don't necessarily doubt that women were, I guess, perplexed and pursued and treated rudely and all that kind of stuff by the guy. It doesn't sound like it was actual felony level instances, but if there were, they should be announced at the time. That's just my feeling about things. If you're, kind of finding some secondary gain from being with the guy, then it's not really a contractual agreement, but ditto with a lot of the women who knowingly went with Harvey Weinstein. It's sad, it's tragic. That shouldn't be. It's horrible. I would never let a daughter of mine go near the guy, knowing anything like that. But you're transactional. So the people who want to ascend with Mario Cuomo, it's like you're doing that kind of pact with the devil, almost literally in this case. Anyway, for my taste, I would rather he stuck around to be kind of piñata blown by the real scandal, which is the kind of, I call it the elder cost. I don't want to, defame the actual Holocaust, but this was a purposeful return of the coronavirus back into the nursing homes. I think merely out of spite, because he did not want Mr. Trump to look good at the time of a presidential election, by using the USS Comfort or the Javits Center, which I guess had been set up partially, but with federal funds and so forth. And he didn't want to use those as outlets for the temporarily overflowing hospitals, principally in Queens borough of New York. And so he went with this other thing. And frankly, a lot of other governors mimicked this. Democrat governors mimicked it. I think it was Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania, Murphy in New Jersey, Whitmer in Michigan, at the very least, and who followed suit. And there are significant numbers of excess elderly deaths in those places. New York having had the highest total, but New Jersey proportionally, I think, very close. Ron DeSantis, speaking of governors, kind of gets lambasted these days for this and that regarding coronavirus, regarding cases in Florida and so forth. But overall, his numbers for infection fatality rate have been far lower than New York's, even with a much more elderly population. I think there may be 30 or 40% more people over 65 proportionally, per capita in Florida than in New York State. But I guess they didn't, they, meaning the Democrat Party, in a sense, kind of wanted to keep him in the club. And I don't know what he's been promised him, kind of, secret handshake, golden handshake, on the way out for keeping his tongue and not embarrassing the other governors. Because I think he, maybe coulda, shoulda, woulda. I mean, it's be self-incriminatory, but it would be a hard way to be kind of a, a poisoned fruit for everybody else. Anyway, leaving the governor aside, but that was the real scandal. That has not really been covered adequately. I have friends, in and around New York City, and a lot of other people who, were near admitted, homosexuals as well. Hot and bothered over him. Interesting seeing Jennifer Rubin's Facebook post on the same topic about how she just thought he was awesome and so forth. Now it's like, now we have a female governor, down with Mario. Anyway, people are rather fickle, and I think this kind of points partially to what we're going to get at today with coronavirus, which is that data is one thing, but how people look at it, when people look at it, and what they want to interpret from it is a vastly different affair. I think people knew about Harvey Weinstein at the time. I think they knew about Andrew Cuomo at the time. I'm an old stage New Yorker. I grew up in New York City, and we had Mario. So I guess Mario's always going to occupy a piece of my diminishing brain space. But anyway, these, it's just the way the data gets looked at is according to your perception. So we are looking at, almost the same thing, but in vastly different ways. Glass half empty, glass half full kind of situation. And, people are looking now at Delta as a thing. And this is really on a misinterpretation of the data. And just so the same way that, people look at Mario Cuomo differently. I mean, the data was all there about the nursing homes, but somehow they don't see it, or they don't want to see it. And they thought he was masterful, that they thought he should be leading the country and so forth, which, of course, if New York pattern had been replicated, we might very well have hit something like 2 million deaths. Again, most of it elderly, but he was not preservatory, was not doing focused protection, which should have been the order of the day right from the get-go, and save our elderly and let young people go around. Instead, it's been kind of this draconian one size fits all, where 5-year-olds have to act as if they are 85-year-olds, and 25-year-olds have to act as if they're 100. It's a silliness. And some of the absurdity, again, I would be happy if one size fits all, if we're somewhat on the freedom and liberty part, and let Mr. Obama have his, huge birthday bash, as long as kids could, do the same and have their birthday bashes, which are probably more important at age 6 than 60, and schooling on top of that. I guess a few people are just saying hello on the feed, which is nice. So let's see, what else can we get at today? I guess one thing I was thinking of mentioning is how this is being misinterpreted. I belong to a congregation, religious, and everything was kind of copacetic for a while, for a number of weeks, and then the last couple of weeks, everybody's wearing masks. The window's open, and it's weather's permitting that. but everyone's back to mask. Everyone's vaccinated. Everyone's wearing a mask. The kids are not vaccinated, and they are wearing masks as well. So I'm going to leave them out of the equation for right now, because really the thing is, people are vaccinated, not wearing masks. Now they're vaccinated and wearing masks. There are a lot of interesting memes. I think I showed one last week. It's like, woman with an umbrella, guys out in the rain, and say, like, hey, stupid, my umbrella is not going to work if you don't put one up. This kind of thing, where your personal protection, if I have an alarm system for my house, does it really depend if some other house down the road doesn't? I don't really think so. If I'm protected even beyond that, I don't think that really makes a difference for other places. But the point I was trying to get at is I think is misperception. So they're perceiving cases, and it becomes, again, case-demic, which was an older term from back last year, where people are feeling as if a pandemic is cases. And I think this comes definitionally. I like to go to kind of root terms. A case is a flexible item. It's really what the epidemiologist wants it to be. I mean, an egg is an egg. Scrambled eggs are scrambled eggs. I think there's some variation what you might consider a hamburger, whether it's this hamburger, Five Guys hamburger, McDonald's hamburger. So definitionally, things can have some variance of how what you call a hamburger, what you call scrambled eggs, and whatnot, how much. But in this particular case, cases are vastly different items. A case of tuberculosis, I like to point out, is one that's actively being treated. And for the most part, that's one with symptoms. There are cases of latent tuberculosis where people are kind of treating prophylactically based on having had quiet TB, but again, with treatment. And pretty much across the board, a case of the flu is the same thing. A case of the flu is you're having symptoms. You have a fever, you got the catarrh, they call it, the coughing, the runny nose, all that kind of stuff. A case of coronavirus, almost from the get-go, I mean, there weren't really the test. It wasn't really the testing early on, so it was a little bit more symptom based. But once testing came to be, it included asymptomatic people if you had a positive test. And this is what CDC does now. You can be a case, obviously, if you have active live symptoms, but you're also a case if you're just showing positive. There's a thing in medicine also called case finding. Which actually, I was discussing this earlier today, which actually almost overturned mammography as a thing. Mammography is well accepted as having reduced mortality and morbidity for women in the last, 5 or 6 decades that it's been around. So I think starting in the mid 60s, 70s. But early on, mammography was seen to be a bad thing because all of a sudden there were more breast cancer cases. Now, why is that? So women had no mammography prior, and so they were kind of showing up with, the palpable, findable by hand breast cancers, and so there would be a certain number per year. I don't know what the percentage of women were getting them. Kind of, boom. Women getting older, they're getting the breast cancer. All of a sudden, the mammography came along, and there were far more cases. And so people said, oh, it must be the mammograms causing the breast cancer because radiation or something like that. We've got to stop doing mammography. And you can check my work on this. But if you just were a little bit patient, the tide turned. Like 5 or 7 years into mammography, the number of cases went down precipitously. And since then, mortality and morbidity have gone down enormously for women in general, for women with breast cancer, because the mammography finds cases. They were finding cases earlier. So that's what case finding is. It's finding cases that otherwise wouldn't have been there. Now, this is not a great analogy because the people with kind of latent breast cancer, early breast cancer, we were finding them earlier, and we still find them earlier now, but those are actual breast cancers. The cases of COVID, we might find them earlier. They don't turn into anything. The young people with a positive test of COVID have a positive test of COVID. The CDC, again, I believe, showed that the mortality rate for young people, for children like under 15 or something like that, is effectively zero, absent cystic fibrosis, absent lymphoma and leukemia. If you're not seriously ill with something else on a pulmonary or systemic basis, or you're not immunocompromised, you're just a regular kid hanging around, whatever, your case of dying from COVID is zero, and it pretty much duplicates for hospitalizations as well. I think there are as well reasonably firm data showing that your rate of illness from the vaccination is higher than from COVID for everybody under 25. I think at the age 25, it starts to tip a little bit, possibly because some of the cases of myocarditis, pericarditis go down a little bit, and also the rate of mortality goes up slightly. And the fact is that the vaccines are fairly safe in the short term. So I don't think it's a huge worry to get a vaccine, for most people middle-aged and above. But the less long-term you have, the better it is in a sense, because we don't really know what the long-term problems or effects are, whether there's going to be any autoimmune syndromes or antibody-dependent enhancement syndromes or what else. So if you don't know what those things are long-term, well, and you're 85 years old, you don't have much of a long-term, you really want to hunker down and be safe now, yeah, fine, vaccine, awesome. And everybody else in between, there's going to be social pressures, jobs and whatnot. But the young people, I think there's a totally different issue. If you're in your 20s, I think you're going to be safer not getting the vaccine because A, you're not going to get sick from the thing. B, getting sick from COVID is actually safer. It's a better form of immunity. I discuss this every week pretty much. It's a better form of immunity. You should go with that. The question I've had, from different quarters is about getting a medical exemption note and whether that's something that people should do. I think there's, going to be obviously some, how would I call it, systemic constraints on physicians to write this. If you're working for a big hospital and they're a physician and they're getting federal funds and this and that, and you're just, a little cog in the wheel, you're just tiny little piece of a bigger machine, it's going to be an awfully deep and pressurized situation for you to buck that trend. I think independent physicians might have a different take on it, and then it becomes kind of an ethical issue. Who's going to stand up? We all remember the picture in Tiananmen Square of the one guy standing up against the tanks. I don't think ultimately he did well, mind you, but he had his moment. And there's pictures of one guy not doing the Sieg Heil in Nazi Germany. It's a rarity to stand against this. I had another friend who actually works for the federal government, and this friend was worried about getting the vaccine. She is fertile, young, and was very distraught about some way compromising that for the purpose of just kind of doing what bureaucracy wants. And bureaucracy has not been that right that often. I'm happy to give a link to kind of a whole bunch of Fauci isms where he's back and forth on the masks and back and forth and this and that. And even to recommend masks at this point is an absurdity. We have, I'm going to go to some of my little figures and memes and whatnot. But there was a day, I think part of it is, because the bureaucracy doesn't really work that well, there were 0 deaths recorded, in the midst of, something like 300,000 cases in the United States. Locally, we've seen this on a number of different days. Every time I want to just check the weather, to figure out whether I need to take a raincoat or whatever, boom, up shows COVID. I didn't ask for it, but it's there, on the, weather.com and so forth. And it tells me the number of cases in Massachusetts, and they generally number in the few thousands, 1,000 to 3,000 or so. And the deaths pretty much hover around 0, 1, 2, 3. Now, in a place the size of Massachusetts, 10 million people, I think maybe like 300 people a day die ordinarily, just because people do die. I hate to break the news to you if this is a new item that people not only live but they die, and generally speaking when they're older. So at this point, the number of people dying from COVID, it represents only a minuscule fraction of those people actually dying in general. And that's it's an amazing feat, because old people are going to be getting one thing or another. Pneumonia has always been called the old man's friend or the old woman's friend, because people are going to die from something, and pneumonia is one of those things from which they can die. Now, before I go to my stuff, I'm going to look at some of the questions here. Is there a correlation between a virus's lethality and its transmissibility? I would say inversely so. Viruses don't have brains, but they're going to be more successful epidemiologically if they can spread without killing the host. So it's like if you like to ride buses, if you have, suicide bombers, yeah, they can get on a bus, they can do a lot of damage, but they're, buses are going to be far more careful about letting them on. They're going to learn the characteristics, and the guy's not going to, hit whatever his offspring are. He's not likely to have offspring because he kills himself along with the bus, and so it's not really a good aim for getting on more buses. So if your idea is to, do minor crime, like most viruses are there for minor stuff as opposed to blowing up the whole individual. Let's say your deal is like Banksy, to do bits of graffiti on the buses or put stickers on the buses or something like that. You could probably get away with that fairly easily. You could put a lot of stickers on a lot of buses and you're barely going to be noticed. You go from place to place. You might get acolytes who want to be like you, so you're kind of replicating, and you'll be able to do a lot of buses, maybe even go worldwide and be able to get a sticker on every bus. And I think there was one guy who put stamps on the dollar bills with George or something like that back in the 90s or something like that, and it became a thing. Where's George, or where's something on your dollar bills? And very successful, very low level crime. It technically is a crime. You're defacing U.S. currency, and but people got away with it for a long time because it's just one of those things. Didn't kill the host. It didn't change the dollar bill. The dollar bill was still fine. You started burning the money or stealing it, you do major crime, you're going to do the time. You're not going to be able to pass along. Strict mask mandates are returning in Northampton and Belmont. That is true. That's because I think in Barnstable County as well. This is because they're finding kind of an anomaly that a lot of the cases, again, cases, not hospitalizations, not deaths, are happening in people who have been previously vaccinated. I like to point this out. I've done a number of times, but if you have been vaccinated does not mean your protection is perfect. You put on a raincoat, galoshes, whatever, you go out in the rain, you can still get wet. Some of you will get wet. You're not going to get it as wet as you did before. You should look at a vaccine like that. It's a raincoat. It's reasonably good. It's not 100%. The Financial Times, I think, had a graph. I've posted it on Viral Conversation, where this is, I believe, which shows pretty much kind of we'll call it like a rain drop appearance or sleet appearance, where the vaccine puts you in a lower age risk group. So if you're 85 and you get the vaccine, you'll pretty much go down to being like, say, a 60, 65-year-old in terms of relative risk. And mind you, that can be awesome because you can have 10 times less risk. And if this holds true with the 65-year-olds, kind of going down to those risks of 45, and the it's a logarithmic scale. When you look at it carefully, because each one of those little blips is actually 10 times more than each line is 10 times more than the previous. So your risks can go down, 100-fold, so forth. If you're in the Middle Ages, when they say middle-aged, 40 years old, whatever, you might go down to the risk of a 20-year-old, but that might be 1,000 times lower risk. So, people do have still some risk of having of being able to turn positive in terms of showing a positive test. The illnesses, though, are absent. The big thing on Cape Cod, Provincetown, people, I hate to, again, this is a news alert, but people in Provincetown tend to party a lot, and they tend to party closely. And I think it was Bear Week, BEAR, and possibly also a fair amount of BARE. And you can look that up separately. But people get close. There's a lot of hugging and this and that, and so people are passing whatever's around, and it just so happens that because so many people are vaccinated, I think 45, maybe 50% of the people who had cases, possibly more, were previously vaccinated. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, the vaccinated are getting cases. Well, okay, so what? It's like, really, so what? This does not translate to illnesses. And again, the Massachusetts data, day after day, which I check, and last I checked, Provincetown, sort of on the far end, but it's still in Massachusetts, and they're not showing any deaths. And along the way, they're not going to be showing very much in the way of hospitalizations. But again, the way the data gets interpreted and understood is vastly different. So this is being done fallaciously, falsely, factitiously, and it's phenomenally stupid. It's pointless. I don't know what else to say and do about it. We can see, though, that the leaders, and those associated with leaders, Barack Obama is not our current leader, but given the state of our current president, I think he's doing a fair amount behind the scenes. Certainly, all the people who consort with him are in that cohort of people who are in charge in a way. And if he's willing to have a big party with lots of people hanging around and dancing and whatnot, Fine, again, fine, but that should be everybody. That's what they really think. That's what they really think about you. They just don't expect to be filmed during doing it, or it shows the power of alcohol and or marijuana, which I guess was one of the party treats as well handed out. Believe it or not, and that's true. So what else we have for question? How do we distinguish dying from COVID from dying with COVID? Most people are dying, have underlying conditions, especially related to obesity. Well, that's true. And I think the only real way to do this is to get rid of the financial incentive to diagnosing COVID. Hospitals and patients both benefit financially with a COVID diagnosis. This has always skewed all the data. Humans are gamers, and we react to the way the table gets tilted. And having money in the game, hospitals, I guess, got $13,000 more per person if it's an ICU case of COVID. They got a certain other amount if it is a diagnosis of COVID. People had their deductibles and co-payments forgiven if they received a diagnosis of COVID. So there's a huge financial incentive to make a lot of things that are not COVID. I don't know. I'm not saying they're fabricating or falsifying the tests, but certainly people are willing to err in that way. I have a personal friend who's, I think, 92-year-old father, had stage 4 and above renal carcinoma, and he was on his way out. He had a matter of months. He had COVID. Boom. They diagnosed him with a COVID death. There have obviously and certainly been cases of motorcycles and whatnot, deaths where people, had incidental COVID exposure. What we've seen, though, overall is that young, healthy people don't really have this as an issue. That's what we really have to keep in mind. And what we're doing to our kids is a form of neglect. It's a form of, educational malpractice and beyond, potentially. Yes, behaviors do follow incentives. So I'm going to go to the mat here. I'm going to show a few pages. This is Worldometer, which I recommend you look at. This is cases and deaths in the UK. So here we see cases. Over here, there are various blips. This is kind of major COVID over here last winter. And now they're seeing more cases, but guess what? The infection fatality rate has gone down to 0. So this is what you really should be looking. Deaths track with hospitalizations. Obviously, death is even worse than being hospitalized. The daily death toll in the UK, which I think has 66 million people, 103. So in a place the size of the UK, 66 million, I think they're supposed to have around 2,000 to 3,000 deaths per day anyway. They're having 100 or so on some days and fewer on other days. You can see the numbers; they're all low. This is my favorite phrase. This is a distinction without a difference. This is pointless to follow. There's no purpose in this. The Delta variant did have some power in a place that had not been exposed to coronavirus substantially prior. And so here's India. The Delta variant is the India strain. Okay, same thing. Well, you call it Delta if you want. You call it India strain if you want. They didn't really have, this is a country of 1.4 billion people, give or take, and they didn't really have much COVID prior. It's pretty much tropical place, windows open. They didn't get that much. And even when they got it, they didn't get that much. But so they had some deaths early on, and they had some deaths after that. So the Delta spike came along here. This was some other variant strain, Alpha, whatever. And so when they got Delta, yes, they experienced deaths, but of course it's not just the same people. It's some different geographic areas. I can't really go into that here, but a lot of these what are seen as waves of pandemic are actually just different parts of your own country getting affected. We see that in the United States, where certain states have been out of phase with other states. The Midwest got it much later than the Northeast, etc. So here, how did they deal with this? Well, they had cases, they had deaths, they went down. So the deaths wound up being 4,000 5,000 a day, and again a population the size of India's, that's 1.4 billion. I don't have time to figure out the number of deaths per day, but 1.4 billion, I guess that's around 10, around maybe 13 million people per year dying. Divide that by 365 days. This is still only a tiny fraction of the number of people dying per day in India anyway. And what happened is they went through the kind of standard it's not really a Gaussian curve, but it's a standard infection pandemic curve. Boom, then they're down. And now, 616 deaths in a country of 1.4 billion is, kind of a rounding error. It's effectively nothing at all. They did this essentially without vaccines. I think even now their national vaccine rate is maybe 15-20% or something like that. At the time Delta was there, it was close to 0.5%, so forth. Here's an interesting country, my favorite country du jour, which is Sweden. They did nothing basically. They did get, they didn't do the lockdowns by any means close to what other countries did. They didn't really do the masks that much. They didn't close schools. They didn't close society. And they had a couple waves here, but they're pretty much down to zero for deaths. Sweden has about 10 million people, and here's we're getting, zero deaths. It's about the same size as Israel. Israel is completely the opposite. Total vaccination, the most vaccinated country and the earliest on earth. And so they are having a mini case-demic. But again, this is a distinction without a difference, because there the deaths are flat as well. So 10 million people, 10 deaths. Okay, again, 10 million people. There's like Massachusetts should be having about 2,000 to 3,000 deaths a day. So this is a nothing. But still, they stop travel. People are doing all kinds of weird reflexive stuff, which I can't fathom. I can't stop. It's going to be up to you to do that. So I recommend you pay attention and try to spread the message. So let's see. I'm going to try to just take a minute and change screens here, and we're not have your screen get populated by this. So there's a little side note fight. I'm going to slightly change subjects here. Well, yeah, why not? I'll just. This is Rand Paul, who has been awesome. He's a medical doctor. He's a physician. I believe he's an ophthalmologist. Dr. Fauci is a medical doctor. Never practiced. I think Rand Paul did. I'm not saying who's the better doctor, but I think Rand Paul is much more close in regard to the facts. This article here is new. This, I believe, just happened. He was censored, basically suspended at YouTube. And you can follow this lead here and find his video. He says something that we've actually covered in our discussion here previously, that you can feel what you want to about masks, and I don't think they do nothing. I think the N95 masks are one that are used in the hospital. They're very nearly occlusive. It's hard to breathe long periods of time. The cloth masks, the holes in the cloth mask, we went over this, way last fall. I forget the exact, I think it's a coronavirus is about 50 microns. It would be like, throwing a golf ball through this doorway with both doors open. It's not that hard. Each one of the holes in the cloth mask would be proportionally the same size. I understand that a lot of them are sitting in aerosol droplets, but still those pass through. And with a cloth mask or a paper mask, you are still having air transfer, even if it's coming from the sides. I do think they stop propulsion. They do not stop interception by breathing. So once something's in the air, maybe outdoors, somebody sneezes right at you, yeah, okay, a mask is awesome. But if you're sitting in a classroom or whatever, you have a mask on, you're still going to be breathing air unless you figure out a way to live without breathing, which is, let me know, because that'll be kind of interesting invention. That is an impossibility. You're not going to be able to do this. You're going to still, it's like being in, in an aquarium or in a pool. And somebody drops dye in one end, and you're somehow with a paper mask not going to be drinking that in if you opened your mouth. It's a craziness. It's all part of the soup and so forth. So any closed spaces, masks are kind of pointless unless you're going to be sneezing out, in which case, mind you, there are a lot of other ways that we've figured out not to sneeze at people. So we don't necessarily need masks. We're not like horses or whatever. We need a feed bag over our face for that purpose. So, he's been kind of putting Dr. Fauci's feet to the fire a little bit, which is an interesting thing. And I recommend you kind of follow up on his page. He's got a Rumble page, which I have highlighted here. So you can see I don't know if you can see it. It's basically Rand Paul. It's Rumble /C/Rand Paul. And you can follow some of his medical things here. He's got a lot of political stuff, obviously. But the interactions with Dr. Fauci have been interesting, and you know, Dr. Fauci is basically wrong. He's saying that he didn't lie, they didn't do gain of function, but it's all really very highly, twisting semantics. This is from 2014 from the NIH director, which I think is pretty close to Dr. Fauci. I think he might be NIAID, but he's right up there. If it wasn't the full director of the NIH, I think he's right in the line. So that, this is talking about the fund. They're recommending a funding pause on certain types of gain of function research. So the question is not that they were doing it. Obviously, they were doing. They're thinking about pausing it. So this is, I guess, Dr. Francis Collins. But there's multiple questions about this. It's like, why are you doing it? Why are you spending money on China? And then to what end? I mean, why would you do COVID when SARS was bad enough? The original SARS was bad enough. Why would you, carry on to do even more? So let me just graze a little bit more here to see what else I have in store for you. I guess this is, kind of backing up what I said before about cases. We don't really need to see this, I don't think. But this, just to show I'm not making it up. This is from the CDC, how they define cases. If you just put in the word asymptomatic here, you'll find that they are counting. Now let's see if we can find the various symptoms of COVID-19 are not specific. The disease presentation can range from no symptoms to severe. So they are counting all of these. Oh, this is actually what I wanted. Criteria for case ascertainment. So determining a case includes people who are asymptomatic, because they're doing everybody basically who's showing a positive test. So this is not from me. This is from the CDC. I can go to the top so you can see it. I take that back. This is the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists, but they're funneling this right up to the CDC, which has the same guidelines as well. So this is here. They're discussing the case classification COVID-19 interim position statement. So this links right to this paper so I got this from the CDC, a secondary link. So you can find this as well. This is how they define it. So this is not my doing. This is the CDC's, how they define it. This is very different from the way that the CDC, CDC defines other, illnesses, including influenza and whatnot. There's just a couple of minor things. These are real diversions. If you're interested in learning more, there's a nextstrain.org. They've got some interesting stuff about other illnesses if you want to track illnesses. The one I liked even more is this covariance.org, and you can check per variant and per country. So this is, I'll just maybe do the UK because I have to try to get my mouse off this thing. They're going by color. Green is the Delta variant. So as time goes on, there are different predominant strains because people get immune to one strain, and or that just happens to be the one that's on that current wave passing around. So I forget the name of this one. You can, they've got them named here. I'm not really concerned about it, but currently this green one is Delta. I guess this one here was Alpha V1. It doesn't really mean it's worse. It just happens to be a different, a different thing. In fact, obviously, I think the coronavirus are fairly similar. We saw in India, people who were naive to the coronavirus, they got sick and they died at a certain percentage, mind you, lower than percentages here, but they died from that India strain. We have the India strain now. We are not dying from it. UK is not dying from it. It just happens to be the one that's around. So what we're really doing now is again, fatuous, fictitious, factitious, fallacious, false, phony, and so forth. We are measuring something that doesn't matter. You could be, we could have done this with the flu or the common cold. This right now is no different from the common cold. The old people are not dying from it. Young people don't know they have it. What is the difference? It's really just, it's testing gone wild. I mean, there used to be these videos, Girls Gone Wild, for the, teenage or young adult crowd. This is testing gone wild. And you have to, get a hold of yourselves. This is just, really too much to be manipulating society still. Maybe I'm going to go around the home stretch here and talk about coronaviruses in general. In fact, that they are and have been cold viruses right from the get-go. So a lot of times you have to go backwards in time. This is a textbook from I think 1999 or so. It's called Medical Microbiology, 4th edition, very romantic title. Chapter 60, coronaviruses. These are not new things, coronaviruses. And here we go. Coronaviruses cause acute, means sudden, basically, mild upper respiratory infection. Here's a key word, common cold. Okay, so this is not that long ago. This is before SARS-1. And these things are not that big a deal because pretty much there's no real animal host recognized at the time for coronavirus. So people would get the coronavirus, they passed it around themselves, some immunity would build up, and that's that. If we had had testing like we do now, and we had somehow were fearful of coronavirus, we'd be going nuts over it back then in 1999 in the same way we're doing it now, closing society. We don't get this coronavirus. Again, this is a lot more akin to the stamp, whatever they stamped on the dollar bill. It's there, it's a mark. It's sort of harmless. Most people wouldn't even notice when they're passing their dollars around unless they're looking for it. I think it was Where's George, if I'm not mistaken. But people who cared about this thing, they could go to a web page and look up Where's George and find their dollar bill where it had been. If other people died. Anyway, it was a silliness. I'm sure there are other silly, fads and trends and TikTok and whatnot. People doing things, that hopefully are less harmful than the knockout game. People have all kinds of behaviors they do. They're pointless, and for the most part, they're not going to change my life one way or another, and nor should it yours. We are letting it do that because the people who like to change people's lives are people who go into government, and they are enjoying changing people's lives. What else? So that's kind of a look back on coronavirus historically. I have some backing up. There's one thing I kind of wanted to get to last week. I did not. This is a post from the esteemed Dr. Randall. Let me check his name here. Oh yeah, that's me, Randy Bach. And I have this post public on Facebook, and I'll read it. Perhaps 2020's opioid deaths more than double 2016's overdoses or opioid deaths, either way. Now, this is a kind of maybe sounds like a heartless concept because every death is a death. I understand that, but in person years, which is an actuarial concept, insurance companies do this, in person years lost, merely this new excess mortality of what I call, and other people call, diseases of despair, are happening at a median age of death at 38. That is to say, the people dying from these narcotic overdoses average 38 years old. These deaths, and there's, mind you, 40,000 excess deaths in 2020 alone versus prior years. 2016's number was about half. There's about 45,000 opioid deaths in 2016. We're up to 93,000 currently. This is lunacy. This is happening. You can't prove it, but it's coincident with lockdowns, with despair, with unemployment, with depression. I don't think anyone would argue that depression went up in 2020. And along the way, people drink more, they drug more, their behaviors are different. They can quote unquote party more. There's fewer things tying them down. We live in a sense, I don't really like the German Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. That was printed on Auschwitz. I think that concept, though, is not wrong. That work is liberating. People need to be working, and they do much better in a sense of mental health. Obviously, not in a concentration camp. And not to use that analogy too frivolously, we have done very similar things to people. We've put them in solitary confinement, oftentimes, which is the single worst punishment that people can have. Conversely, the people who died, in the first phase of COVID, average, median age was around 82, and about 45% of them were nursing home level of age and comorbidities. I think their average life expectancy is probably less than a year and a half. I think it would be hard to do the entire cohort of people who die from COVID, but all of them have comorbidities, and the number of man years or person years that have passed from the opioid epidemic at about, say, 40 per person. So 40 per person times 40,000 or so is I think 1.6 million person deaths. So that's already on a par with the number of person deaths, person year deaths that have happened, with the first 12 to 15 months of COVID. So this is something to ponder as we want to institute more of the, what I call draconian measures. So I might close with just a few facts and figures and pictures, maybe on a random basis. So I've had some questions lately about writing medical exemptions for young people not to get the vaccine. I would not do it on a medical basis for older people. I think the data are reasonable that you have a higher rate of issues potentially with COVID than you do with vaccine. If you have a religious objection or philosophic, there are some states that will allow you to have that. I think there may be a handful of states in the U.S. that will allow you to have a philosophic reason not to take a vaccine. I think most all of them will let you have a religious one, except for maybe 5 or so. But even including a lot of the bluer states will allow religious exemptions. I think the federal government is allowing religious exemptions as well. And I don't think you necessarily have to explain it. But as far as kids who don't have a philosophy, say, and may not be observant religiously, I don't know if we can. I can't quite expand this, but the red numbers here are problems regarding pericarditis and myocarditis. This is from the VAERS, which is I think an offshoot of the CDC. We can see their logo here. The rate of issues from COVID vaccination are higher for the under 25-year-olds than they are from than the side effects and problems and issues from COVID itself. The COVID vaccine is I think again relatively harmless, but it is about 25 times more harmful than your average influenza vaccine. So this is something to keep in mind. It is not, we've had vaccines for a long time. So I'm going to just kind of end with a few memes that I saw and liked. Here's Obama's birthday party. And again, God bless him. I hope he has a great time. He's dancing, having a party, and he's got a microphone, so forth. But this conversely is your child in solitary. This is not good for their minds. This is not good for their bodies. It's not good for their souls. Kids do better, frankly, experiencing more virons young. They build up their immune system. It's kind of like a chew toy for a dog, sharpens their teeth. This one's a little bit, touchy, but if you ever wondered whether you would have complied during 1930s Germany, now you know. This is sad because, we see people, this is an anonymized photo I took on the street passing by in my car. This is a woman with a mask outdoors. It's about 85 degrees, beautiful weather. This is not, cold season really in Massachusetts. And outdoors is never cold season. Not an issue. People don't have really runny noses this time of year. Nobody's near her to be sneezing at her. This is sad. This shows up every day on my smartphone. If I check all I wanted to check the weather, excessive heat watch. I think this was yesterday or today. Here we go. New deaths, 0. So maybe you can tell me what the ratio here of cases to death. That would be infinite, or vice versa would be 0. This is not something you should be worrying about here. The United States had the same thing. I think mostly because it's bad bureaucracy, because they don't really, they don't compile their data smoothly. They take the weekend off. This is how much they care about the pandemic. They take these days off. So they had 0 deaths, but this on Sunday, I guess. But the rolling average of deaths is very, very low. You can't even see it. This black line on the bottom. But the deaths in the United States range in about, I guess kind of proportionally similar to Massachusetts, maybe 1 or 2 per 10 million. It's probably around 30, 40 times higher. That you're talking about, maybe 50 to 100, 200 deaths in the whole country day by day. Here's another. It's kind of a Twitter thing. If the CDC doesn't recommend Obama cancel his birthday party, don't listen when they recommend you shut down your business. If the CDC doesn't recommend Biden close the border, don't listen when they recommend you close your church. So again, the leaders have to do what they really feel, what they're importuning us to do. If they don't buy into it, nor necessarily should you. This is kind of a record of the Cuomo thing I mentioned earlier in the day. This is from somebody else's post I picked up just randomly. This is from more than a year ago, March 2020. And this is a friend of a friend. And I just happened to be looking at our page, and public post. New York Times, is it okay to take a walk? March 2020. What a relief. This is what my friend's friend said. What a relief to know this is okay. So here he is. Now, mind you, at the very least, he's out maskless, out for a walk, and this is okay, March 2020. New York Times says okay. She's figured that out. But somehow now that we have 0 deaths per day, it's not. If people can convince you of this, then then this may not be, that wrong. So you have to ponder this stuff and get on the program. You have to, figure out how to make your voices heard and say what you have to say. So I have done that as of tonight. I apologize for being a little bit late. Please let me know, again, any comments or questions. Like I said, minor advertising. Why do I do this? I do this, in a sense, as a public service. I'm not getting paid for this. If you'd like to contribute, that's something I don't even really have set up yet, but you let me know if you'd like to do that, and I can probably figure out the means for this. I enjoy learning about this stuff. I'm part of a group called pandata.org, and it's been fascinating to listen to people far more expert than I am on a scientific basis go over the data. But frankly, you can do this also. You can do this on your own because the data are there, they're accessible, and you have to watch and pay attention and learn. And just as a final, I guess, blurb, I am working on a patient-facing cancer book, and I've had some really awesome times and interviews with Tom Masty, who is suffering right now. Not quite suffering, but he has recurrence of his esophageal cancer. So your thoughts and prayers will be welcome for him. But I would appreciate, I'm sure he would appreciate, if you graze over to our Dodging Cancer Facebook page, and you can find some of those videos and learn about a problem that's a real problem, that's a persistent problem. And if you have a case of cancer, it's a real thing. It's not a case of coronavirus where you just have a positive test and never need to worry. So these are, again, diametrically opposed situations. One will be with us forever. People ask me sometimes predictions about coronavirus. A lot of viruses tend to be persistent if they have an animal reservoir. The influenza does. It goes in pigs, typically in China, rural China, when they bring the pigs indoors from their farm. Coronavirus typically has not had animal reservoirs. I'm not even sure we have one necessarily now that's communicating with us. I think there was kind of an odd transfer from bats to humans in China because maybe they were eating them back in 2003. I think this episode is nothing to do with that. This episode merely is a laboratory leak from Wuhan Institute of Virology, and I don't think we're necessarily going to recur from this because it's not really transmitted to pigs. I don't think dogs and cats either. Anyway, that's the information I have for you. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to follow up with anything else, please let me know. I look at emails and so forth. Thank you very much, and I hope